In this video, we're going to be talking about motor development. So think about what you know about motor development, if anything. Think about what you know the word motor to mean. Many people think, when you think of motor, you think of an engine in a car or a lawnmower or something like that. But motor comes from the root word movement. So when we're talking about motor development, we're talking about our bodies moving. And in particular with motor development, that is defined as changes that allows a person to be able to control the movement of their body parts. Okay, so when we're born, we're certainly moving, but it takes a while for us to actually gain conscious control over different areas of our body. So that's what we're going to be talking about next. There's a couple of what are called growth principles that we need to talk about. The first one here is called the cephalocaudal growth principle. And cephalocaudal kind of comes from two root words here. Cephalo or cephalus means head. Okay. Caudal means tail or stem or base. So when we're talking about the cephalocaudal growth principle, we're talking about the idea that when we're babies, our motor development begins at the head and progresses towards the feet. In other words, what we're able to control starts at our head and sort of moves down our bodies to our feet. Use this little photo of a baby to demonstrate what I'm talking about here. To make it a little more concrete, you may know that one of the first motor milestones that children experience is being able to hold their heads up. And, because that's kind of at the head part, the cephalo part of our body, that's one of the first things that comes along. Then as we progress in our motor development, we're able to control things further down our body towards our tail. We don't really have tails as humans, of course, but kind of towards our feet. So this little girl would be able to, after she's able to hold her head up, she'd be able to control her arms and then her trunk and torso, so kind of the middle part of her body. And then later on would come the ability for her to control her legs, and lastly, the ability for her to control her feet. So head to toe, cephalocaudal. At the same time, there's another growth principle happening, and this one is called the proximodistal growth principle or pattern. So here, the roots are proxim. If you think about approximate, that means around or close to. And then distal, think about distance, means far. So the proximodistal growth principle is the idea that our motor control when we're babies starts at the center of our bodies and moves towards the extremities. So kind of from the center out. So this little girl, at the same time, the cephalocaudal growth principle is happening. The proximodistal growth principle is going on as well. So she's going to be able to control her arms before she can control her hands. So center out, right? Head to toe, cephalocaudal, proximodistal, center out. So she's able to control the upper parts of her arms before the lower parts of her arms, and the lower parts of her arms before her hands. Okay. And then eventually she'll gain control of her fingers. Down here, center out, right? So down here on the legs, she's going to be able to control her legs before she can control her feet. And then later on will come the ability for her to control her toes. Okay. So just kind of keep in mind as we're developing this motor control, it goes from head to tail, center out. So this next slide, I think, gives you some visuals that may help you understand. I don't know how great these pictures are, but they might help. So this picture over here is demonstrating the cephalocaudal growth principle, and it's got this weird kind of half split picture here. And what they're trying to demonstrate there is sort of the proportions of a baby's body relative to an adult body. Okay. So if somehow we were able to take a baby and blow it up to full adult size, but keeping everything in proportion, or if we were somehow able to take an adult woman and shrink her down to a baby size, but keep all of her body parts in proportion, it would look something like this. And, we'll talk about this over and over again, but when we're babies, our heads are big. I mean, relative to the rest of the body, the head is really big when we're babies, certainly bigger than when we're adults. Okay. So it kind of makes sense that it's going to be important for us when we're babies to hold that head up, to be able to control the head before we can control the legs. Okay, our legs are relatively short compared to the rest of us when we're born. So that's all that's trying to demonstrate. It's just, the head is really important to control before we control these lower parts of our body. Over here is the proximal-distal growth principle being demonstrated. And I think this is supposed to be illustrating the same child, aging and growing. Remember, proximal distal is the ability to control parts of our bodies that are kind of close to our center before the ones that are further out in our bodies. So, when this child is pretty young, he doesn't seem to have a lot of control over his arms or his hands. Gets a little bit older and is able to grasp a rattle, let's say. So, the further out from the body, the more he's able to control. And then when he gets even a little bit older, he can control those fingers a little bit better. And so I think this is supposed to be, like alphabet soup. So he's able to kind of reach in and pick out letters if he wants to, where he would not have been able to do this at a younger age, and certainly not at this age. Okay. Cephalocaudal growth principle, proximal-distal growth principle. At the same time, there's one more growth principle happening that we need to talk about. This one is called the mass to specific principle. And this is the idea that we are able to control the large muscles in our bodies before we can control the smaller muscles in our bodies. And all of these are related. So I indicate here that this is especially related to the proximal-distal growth principle. But, and you know this, because you were a child once, and if you've been around children, you certainly know that they have a harder time controlling their fingers and their small muscles in their fingers. That comes later than the ability to control the bigger muscles. So if you think about what are the biggest muscles in our bodies, the muscles in our legs are pretty big. The muscles in our trunk that kind of allows us to turn and twist, those are pretty big too. The muscles in our upper arms are pretty large. So we are able to control all of those before we can again control the fingers. Okay. So that's why it's very common for utensils and pencils and crayons that are designed for young children to be fat. It's just easier for them to grip because they can control the larger muscles in their arms and their hands before they can control those smaller muscles in the fingers.